Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with sausage cheese balls. That's right, 'tis the season to entertain large groups of people. 'Tis also the season to be running short on time and money, which is why a recipe like this can be a real savior. And what these sausage cheese balls may lack in sophistication, they more than make up for being relatively inexpensive and very simple to make. So let's go ahead and get started with one of the main ingredients, the sausage. And traditionally, this recipe is done with breakfast sausage, but personally, I prefer spicy Italian sausage for this. So that's what I have 1.25 pounds of in this bowl. And while I don't use the breakfast sausage, I will, in a little bit of an homage to the original, add in a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg. Not too much, just a touch. We also want to do a nice big handful of chopped green onions, as well as some grated cheddar cheese, and a lot of it. And one great tip here, if you can, try to get most of it in the bowl. And in case you're keeping score at home, I'm using extra sharp cheddar, but I'm pretty sure your favorite cheese will work. So as usual, that kind of thing's up to you. You are the Jesus of your cheeses. And then it's time for maybe the most key ingredient, the dry biscuit mix. Except that's not what I use. I just use good old-fashioned self-rising flour, which works just as good, if not better, and I'll explain why on the blog post. So we'll go ahead and dump that in, and then what we want to do is mix this up with our hand, but before I start, I like to give it a brief mixing with a fork, just until everything's sort of coated with the flour. And at that point, I will switch to my bare hand, which you can just start with. But I think by giving it a little mix with the fork first, it's going to help prevent our fingers from getting all gunked up too quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the old 5-finger food processor and give this a mix until it just starts to come together, at which point we're going to stop and drizzle in 2 tablespoons of milk or water. And then we'll continue mixing until it's just combined and we're able to form balls. And while a lot of people add that milk right at the beginning, I think all this comes together better if you give it a mixing first and then add the liquid, okay? But anyway, like I said, we will continue mixing until our ingredients are just combined, at which point we will stop because we're done. And at this point, we could use it immediately, or we could wrap it up and pop it in the fridge until needed. So yes, you can definitely make this mixture ahead of time, which of course is always an advantage for holiday entertaining. But either way, when we are ready, this is how I think we should form and cook our sausage cheese balls. So what we're going to need besides our mixture is some type of scooper so we can get equal portions, as well as a little bit of cold water for our fingers, because as you know by now, damp hands make smooth balls. And of course, you're also going to need a baking sheet, which I've covered with some lightly oiled foil. So we'll go ahead and we'll scoop out some mixture, and then using some very lightly moistened hands, we will roll those into balls and place those down nice and evenly spaced on our baking sheet. And by the way, I should mention, there are many, many different formulas for this recipe, with all kinds of different ratios between the sausage and the cheese and the biscuit mix. So that is another thing we can discuss on the blog. And by discuss, I mean argue. But I guess the point is, no matter what specific recipe you use, the technique is pretty much the same. And then once we do have a pan of our sausage cheese balls successfully prepped, we are ready to bake these up in a surprisingly hot oven. We're going to go ahead and transfer these into the center of a 450-degree oven for about 12 minutes or until cooked through. And if you want, for that last minute or two of cooking time, you can switch your oven to broil to give these a little extra color. And after about 12 minutes in the oven, plus minute of optional broiling, they should look something like this. Oh man, those look good. And then once these are out of the oven, we have to let them sit for exactly 5 minutes before we try to pull them off the foil. If not, they're probably still going to be stuck and they might tear. So give them 5 minutes, and once they've cooled down just a little bit, they should come off very easily. And as you can see, those bottoms have formed a glorious, shiny, crispy crust. Oh yeah. And I really should let these cool down a little more before I take a bite. But I'm not going to, because they look and smell too good, and these really are quite interesting. And I mean the good interesting, not the air quotes interesting. They are cheesy, bready, and sausagey all at the same time. So at this point, we'll go ahead and transfer those onto some more appropriate serving platter, usually along with some kind of dip. For me, it's just a simple mustard mayo, or as they call it in the world of casual dining, Dijonnaise. And by the way, if you haven't had these before, and you're imagining something light and tender, these are not that. These are actually fairly firm and dense, which is why I think they're so perfect to serve to people that are drinking. In fact, that reminds me, don't serve these to sober people. The subtleties will be lost on them. And by the way, when I mentioned they form a nice crispy crust on the bottom, I wasn't kidding, check it out. And I would have done that harder, but I was afraid of breaking the plate. But anyway, that's it. Sausage cheese balls. Just a very tasty ball and surprisingly addictive. And please, if you're bothered by that double dip you just saw, don't be. I'm going to eat this whole plate myself. That's how good they are. And I'm not even drinking, allegedly. So I really do hope you give these a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.